Traffic moved steadily through the west zone of Sao Paulo. Motorcycles passed in both directions, engines buzzing as people went about their day. One rider who stood out only because he was alone stopped briefly as the flow of vehicles slowed. He was a retired police officer, no longer in uniform, no longer on duty, just riding his motorcycle like anyone else. Then everything changed. 2 motorcycles closed in, then a third. 3 men surrounded him, moving with confidence and speed. They pointed a gun at him and made their intentions clear. They wanted his motorcycle. The retired officer didn't resist. He followed instructions. He stepped off the bike and moved onto the sidewalk, keeping his hands visible. One of the criminals, wearing a delivery backpack, climbed onto the motorcycle and tried to take control of it. For a brief moment, it looked like the robbery had worked perfectly. That was when the officer saw his chance. From the sidewalk, he drew his weapon and fired. One of the criminals was hit immediately and collapsed at the scene. The other 2 panicked and fled on their motorcycle, leaving their partner behind. In a small bakery, the day felt routine. A worker restocked drinks near a freezer. One customer sat quietly, waiting. The calm was broken when a man wearing a closed helmet walked in holding a gun. The threat was immediate. The worker ran toward the back in fear. The customer stayed frozen in his seat. The robber approached confidently and took the customer's phone, believing he had full control of the store. What he didn't realize was that the police were already nearby. Just seconds later, the headlights of police motorcycles appeared outside. Officers rushed in with weapons drawn. The robber barely had time to react. A shot was fired, and he fell to the ground wounded. The officers moved quickly. They removed the weapon and secured the area. The bakery was safe again, and no innocent people were hurt. What could have turned into a tragedy ended almost instantly. It was nighttime, and the traffic flowed through the streets of Sao Paulo as usual. A man riding a motorcycle slowed briefly, unaware he was being watched. Another motorcycle stopped in front of him. Then a third appeared behind them, carrying 2 people. It looked sudden, but it wasn't random. The criminals had planned the ambush. What they didn't know was that the man on the motorcycle was a plainclothes police officer. The moment the robbery was announced, he let his bike fall to the ground on purpose. The unexpected move confused the attackers. In that split second, the officer drew his weapon. Shots rang out. One suspect ran. Another abandoned the motorcycle and fled. From another camera angle, one of the criminals could be seen collapsing after being hit. Later, the injured suspect died. The other 2 were arrested after seeking medical treatment. The officer remained calm, secured the scene, and waited for backup. A silver vehicle drove calmly along a quiet street. Nothing about the moment felt unusual. Then, without a warning, a car with flashing lights appeared behind it and sped forward. It suddenly braked hard and blocked the silver vehicle's path. 3 men jumped out. They wore tactical-style clothing and carried long weapons. From the outside, it looked like a real police stop. Their movements were fast and confident, meant to intimidate. But the driver of the silver car noticed something was wrong. He was an off-duty military police officer. He saw that there were no clear police markings, no proper identification. The way the men positioned themselves didn't match real police procedure. In seconds, he understood the truth. These were criminals pretending to be officers. Before they could take control or issue orders, the real officer reacted. He drew his weapon and confronted them. The fake officers hesitated. The plan fell apart instantly. Realizing they had been exposed, the criminals fled without taking anything. No shots were fired. No one was hurt. The robbery failed because one officer paid attention to the smallest details. A woman parked her motorcycle on a quiet residential street near a busy road. She placed the bike on its stand and walked toward her gate. In the background, a red motorcycle with two men passed by slowly, watching. They disappeared briefly, and everything felt normal again. Moments later, the same motorcycle returned at high speed. It jumped onto the sidewalk and stopped right beside the woman. The passenger got off and announced the robbery. Startled, the woman stepped away from her bike and leaned against a post, trying to stay calm. Across the street, a man dressed in black had been watching the situation unfold. He immediately understood what was happening. He was an off-duty police officer. As the suspects tried to flee with the motorcycle, the officer moved in. Gunfire broke the silence of the street. One suspect fell to the ground. The other managed to escape, even though he was injured. The officer kept control of the scene and reassured the shaken victim until backup arrived. The woman walked away unharmed. It was the middle of the day on a busy street in Sao Paulo. Traffic moved steadily, and people went about their routines. Outside a gym, a man wearing a backpack stood near the entrance waiting. It looked like a completely ordinary afternoon. Then a motorcycle appeared. At first, it didn't seem suspicious. The bike slowed down near the man, and the passenger got off. In seconds, the situation changed. The man announced the robbery and demanded the victim's phone. With no time to react, the victim handed it over. Nearby, someone quickly closed the gym gate, trying to avoid being pulled into the danger. But the robber wasn't satisfied. He demanded the phone password, stepping closer and increasing the pressure. The victim looked trapped. Everything pointed toward the robbery being successful. What that criminal didn't know was that inside the gym, an undercover police officer had been alerted to what was happening outside. As the robber prepared to escape, the gym gate opened. The officer stepped out with his weapon drawn. Shots were fired. The criminal tried to return fire and run, but the officer stayed calm and precise. The robber was hit and fell. During the chaos, the victim was also struck by a bullet fired by the criminal. Emergency services were called immediately. Both the injured victim and the suspect were taken to the hospital. The suspect remained under arrest, while the officer walked away unharmed. What started as a simple street robbery ended because one officer was paying attention at the right moment. Two men stood on a narrow street near a restaurant. One scrolled through his phone while the other watched the street. It felt calm, normal. Nothing suggested danger was seconds away. Suddenly, shouting came from inside the restaurant. One of the men handed his phone to his friend and walked toward the noise. Before he reached the entrance, another man stepped directly in his path and announced a robbery. The suspect shoved him violently, trying to force him inside where the crime was already happening. The man raised his hands, appearing helpless, but he wasn't. He was an off-duty police officer. The moment he saw an opening, he reacted. He drew his weapon and fired. Gunshots echoed through the street. One suspect tried to run but fell after being hit. Another fled, already wounded, but was caught a short distance away. When police arrived, a third suspect hiding inside the restaurant surrendered. Two criminals were arrested. One did not survive.